Just a quick note before we begin. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. We are not licensed professionals, just parents who've experienced unimaginable loss. This isn't meant to replace help from a therapist, doctor, or other mental health professional. If you're struggling, please reach out to someone qualified. You are not alone. Welcome to Don't Forget to Breathe. I'm Bruce Barker, along with my co-host, Kristin Glenn. Tonight, we're talking about something almost every grieving parent has heard at some point. Time heals all wounds. All right, I'll be honest. When someone said that to me early on, it didn't comfort me in the least. It frustrated me because losing a child isn't a wound that simply fades. It's not something that gets easier the more days you stack in the calendar. Time is the only thing that passes. But time doesn't bring our child back. Time doesn't erase the void. It doesn't make the love smaller. What I've learned is that grief evolves. It can soften, it can shift, but it doesn't expire. The sharp moments will still show up. The landmines are still there, though what would have been still catches me in the chest. So if time doesn't heal this loss, what actually might help? In this first part of our conversation, Kristin and I speak honestly about the myth of time healing all wounds, the reality of living with a forever void, and why healing isn't something that happens to us. It's something we actively step into. So let's take a breath and talk about it. Hey, Kristin, how are you?
I'm okay. How you doing, Bruce?
I'm doing great. So our episode tonight is why time doesn't heal child loss, but what actually helps. So we're going to deep dive into that and see where this goes.
I'm ready.
So this myth that's out there, time heals all wounds. What do you think? You buy into that?
No, I think it's a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
How's that to start off with a little bluntness?
I would say so.
And what a platitude. Yeah. I'm so glad we picked this tonight because, my February is my birthday month for my sweet Zachary, and it's turned to much more of a peaceful reflection and positive time for me. It's gone away from the sharpness of those first several years, but it's not because time magically healed it. I do think it's just some type of platitude that our society likes to lean heavily on. And, I'm calling it. I don't think that time's going to heal this one. This is not a minor little ouchie. It's as we've been looking at some of these quotes, it says, this is not a pain, this is an amputation. And I think that there's a piece of me that's missing, and time doesn't just all of a sudden make you regrow that part of yourself. I'm just a different person now after this many years, 30, 35 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. So 35 years, you're not all healed up.
Nope.
Because I think we talked about it. We talked about this before, that
we did.
You had mentioned healing is a verb.
Yeah, I like that active verb. I'm not a fan of the past tense verb that healed. Just like you were talking about the scarring. Is it an open wound? I wouldn't say so, but is it a wound? Is it a noticeable scar? Yeah. So I'm glad we're able to dive into this and speak our truths tonight.
Definitely. I think that, I would probably say every listener, I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying every listener has probably heard this phrase and maybe even said to them, and how isolating that has to feel for them. But it's not unique. It's not something kind of getting thrown out there. I think that phrase and those things there, it's out there a lot. I came across this quote from an author. This author's name is Dean Koontz, and probably most of the listeners are familiar with him and the type of suspenseful novels and books that he writes, which I love. But I found this really interesting. And so here's a quote from Dean Koontz. It says, "Time doesn't, as advertised, heal all wounds. Although the wrenching immediacy of grief eventually passed, the settled sorrow that replaced it might in its own way be even more intense." Ooh, how'd
Boy,
that land with you?
it lands, man. I mean, there's lots of that quote, that the subtle sorrow and the word intense within that sentence. I think I often say things like it's not as sharp, it's softened, it's subtle, but that he also recognizes the intensity of something that is subtle, because you wear it like a cloak, it's forever. You carry it. And what an insightful quote that is. And what an interesting source. When I hear those types of quotes, it kind of goes back to our last episode. He gets it. You don't know what his story is, but that guy gets it. Something's happened in his world that is not just a random thought. That is someone that has lived through something that allowed him to say those really powerful words.
Yeah, because that's about as accurate as you can get. One of the things that I've seen is grief. It evolves, like he kind of mentioned there, but it doesn't expire. It's always there. It's just we're wearing it differently. There was a thing I've heard it said, right? It'll get easier with time, and I think probably a lot of our listeners have heard that, and that would, if somebody said that to me, especially early on, that'd really piss me off. You can say it'll get easier with time. That might apply to habits and rituals and maybe even learning a musical instrument. Sure, that's going to get easier with time, but grief isn't something you practice your way through. With loss, I mean, time doesn't heal anything. Time just passes. And
Absolutely.
then we're left to learn how to carry what remains. I mean,
yeah, to just think the ticking of the clock is going to heal. It takes so much intentionality and support and grit and tears and realizing that joy and sorrow coexist. And it's almost disrespectful to just tell someone that's going through this type of tragedy, just hang out, chill out for a while, and it's just going to get better magically. And especially, I mean, the people that I've had the honor to be with, and they do their grief work. They work so hard, minute by minute, to do that active verb of healing, and to think that time is going to heal it. Okay, well, tell me, when? Is there a timeline? Is there someone going to tell you at this moment, magically you're healed? It's like what you said, grief and an expiration date. Do I look at the milk carton and see when my grief is going to expire?
exactly.
Is there a sell by date?
Yeah.
It's just that ridiculous in my mind.
Well, and you think about it, we talk about what's gone, right? So you mentioned earlier the amputation, like this. So with time is not going to change the fact that your child is gone. And that's what, as far as getting easier, it's easier if our child comes back, if our child's still here, if our child never died. So time doesn't change that fact. Your child
Absolutely.
is gone.
Yeah. I mean, when you reflect on that, Bruce, what part of your grief feels as sharp today as the moment that Kristin left this earth? I mean, no matter how many years it's been, what do you feel like that feels so much like it did that many years ago?
I think it's almost like we mentioned before, like there's landmines that pop up, and those can be just in different conversations, casual conversations with people, and maybe they talk about grandkids,
Mm,
grandchildren, right? And so Kristin um, would be 40, which means I should have had some by now if that life had continued. So there's there's moments, and it's, I know early on some advice, that I was given is like the what ifs, like, you don't go down that road when you can, and early on, it makes sense. You can spiral very quickly. Now I will sit in the moment. I won't brush it off. So if that happens, and then I think about what didn't happen, what would have been for me, and I think about what had been for her,
wow.
so there's where, you know, some tears can come up, and it's like, what did she miss in this as well? Those joys and of being a mom and calling me and going, all right, Dad, what do you think? And I could be, a sarcastic jerk and make fun of whatever was going on, and we have our little laugh, but then actually be able to try to help. And yeah, so it's those moments that I'll sit with them. So
Yeah.
I'll be present with them, and not, and like I say, just not brush them off. So then when that's going on, then that grief and that sorrow can feel, and I think you put it very well, can be just as sharp. It's a good way to describe it. And I think our listeners get that. It's like, it's a point. Like it's just a sharpness that you can feel, I can feel in my chest. And so now I sit with that,
Yeah.
and
It's, you're
it's
able to
doing the
sit with it.
work.
It
I
is.
mean,
And I think it's exactly what you said, the grieving for ourselves because we don't get to witness the continuation of their life, and the grieving for them of
yeah,
all they deserved to experience. I feel so sad for Zach and all that he was meant to embrace in this life. And, that sorrow didn't come for a while. In the beginning, it was like I could only manage my own sorrow. And wow, kind of an aha moment. Like I feel like over the years, the part that has shifted is the realization of the sorrow of others. Because I had to be pretty narrow in the beginning because it was only manageable to think of my own sorrow. But now watching my husband's continuation of his sorrow, my mother's, the siblings that never got to meet Zach, and then really ultimately to imagine Zach's, the void of what he should have gotten to do.
yeah.
Kristin should have been able to choose if she wanted to become a mother and consult with, Grandpa Bruce and
Yeah.
kind of muddle through the jokes in the beginning and know that in the
Mhm.
end there was going to be some great wisdom and you would have been an incredible grandpa.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think sitting, taking the time to sit with that, it's like we've, that kind of falls right back into this theme that we're talking about, of this moving on. And I know we've mentioned this before. It's not about moving on, because that's not it. It's moving with. The grief is coming with you.
Oh yeah, it's integrated. It is part of you.
Yeah. So I think um, to deny it, um, when those thoughts come up or are on a landmine, if I've got that moment to be able to sit with it. And as I do that, and then, yeah, so it feels just as sharp as it did then, but then it softens.
Mm-hmm.
It softens from taking that time to reflect and to be there and knowing that time isn't going to bring her back.
Right.
So,
And, I feel like the grief, if you think of grief as like an identity within itself, it was a stranger to me. I didn't know grief. I had never experienced a deep, deep sorrow before this happened to me. And now grief is very familiar to me. It's, as you said, moving with, but I just feel like I know grief. It sits right next to me all the
mhm.
time. It's my kind of constant companion. And I remember one time during a support group asking everyone in the group, would you give up your grief? If you could give up your grief with a snap of the fingers, would you give it up? And we talked about it, and it was like giving up grief is giving up the love. So I'm taking
Right.
I'm taking the package deal. I wouldn't give up the fact that I had the opportunity to love this child, and thus I will grieve as intensely as I love.
I think we've heard that, and we've probably heard it from other people. I'm sure it's probably something that has been read. I mean, there's multiple books on child loss and grief and healing and things like that. And I think one of the things that I've read before is about that the amount of grief and the loss and the sorrow that you feel is like equal to or whatever the amount of love. And so no, you wouldn't give up one to lose the other. So it's like this I mean, I know my love for Kristin has not diminished with time. So why would the grief?
Yes, that's exactly right. It changes, but a
Yeah.
diminish means that it's a finite. Somehow diminishing also means that it's finite. And our love for our children didn't have a container. It wasn't like something that you could say, oh, I have X amount of ounces of love, so
Yeah.
it feels like the same with grief. It's infinite.
So what's changed for you, even the fact that it's been 35 years? Or better question, what hasn't changed for you?
That's such a good question. I think what hasn't changed is just the realization of the void that's unfillable, right? I think
Yeah.
actually that's become accentuated. I don't think as a woman in my 20s, I had the wisdom to realize that in that moment when he was no longer on this earth, that this grief would be forever a part of me. But I think I naively might have thought it was a fillable void,
Mm.
and I think not that I could ever have another Zachary, but I think I felt like fill my space and time and circle and home with children and animals and busyness and hobbies and travel and chaos and, all the things. And I think the wisdom of now being not 20 at all anymore, there is a sense of just settling in that this is a void. This is a forever void. And how could it not be? That would be disrespectful to Zach to imagine that anything could take this space. This is a Zach size hole
Hmm.
in my life. And it's like a thumbprint. It's not replicatable. It's not something so I think that remains. Maybe when you say, is it unchanged? It actually is changed, but in a way that it is as, you know, that author said, more of an intense, subtle sorrow, that void is maybe even more, there's more of awareness that as I become older, as my life continues on, that he has left, a Zach size space forever.
Well, like we mentioned before, the grief evolved.
Yeah.
But again, didn't expire. I think for me, I used those as, and whether it was work, whether it was relationships, whatever it was, as distractions from the void.
Yes.
And probably tried to fill them unhealthily.
For sure. So tempting.
With a lot, with just pouring myself into work, and then other people, and relationships, casual be it or whatever, and not sitting with the grief and not sitting with the loss and doing any of the work. And that was one of the things that it took a while, obviously, for me to learn. But that grief and that pain over time that I tried to bury with all of these distractions, time did not decompose it. It stayed there in its original state. And then at some point, when it just kept eating away at me, knowing I needed to start doing something, that had not changed over time. That the rawness of that grief and of that sorrow and that loss was still there waiting for me to then, like, okay, let's do some work on this.
I wish I knew who to attribute this quote to, but it said, try to answer the door as grief is gently knocking, because it is very patient and it'll wait for you and knock down your door later on in life, and I feel like that definitely was a huge realization as I too filled with distractions and wanted to avoid, and have watched so many people that do that with, work, relationships, busyness, substances, healthy coping, unhealthy coping. But I had kind of a moment of realization when you were talking that what I do think has an expiration date, sadly, is support.
So we're going to pause here for part one, because if there's one thing we want to challenge in this conversation, it's the idea that time alone heals this kind of loss, because it doesn't. And if you're listening to this as a parent who's lost a child and you've ever felt isolated by those platitudes, we want you to know you are not alone. If you feel prompted in any way to share your child's story, we invite you to reach out. This podcast exists so parents can speak their truth, introduce the world to their child, and share not only their grief, but their love. You don't need any special equipment. We can record wherever you are. Our contact information follows the end of this episode, so please reach out. Join us in part 2, where we'll begin with a powerful realization about grief, that while grief may not expire, sometimes the support around us does. So until next time, I'm Bruce Barker, along with Kristin Glenn, and please, don't forget to breathe. One more thing, if you found meaning or comfort in these conversations, consider becoming a supporter of the Don't Forget to Breathe podcast. Your support helps keep these stories alive and makes it possible for others to find hope in their own grief journey. For as little as $3 a month, your support goes to offset costs associated with production. You can learn more on the information page for this episode. You can also contact us by going to the show notes and click on Send Us a Text. Or my contact email is bruce.barker61@yahoo.com. That's BRUCE.BARKER61@yahoo.com. Until next time.